IVM.
Hi, I'm Satyajit.
Hi, I'm Racheta.
Welcome to Paperback by the Open Library Project.
We have as our guest today Dr. Marcus Ranney, General Manager at Thrive Global, an initiative by Huffington Post. In the first half of the podcast, we deep dive into Homo Deus by Yuval Noah Harari and our interaction with Professor Harari during his visit to Mumbai.
In the second half, we also discuss A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking, Extremes by Dr. Kevin Fong, Inner Engineering by Sadhguru, and Famous People's Famous Speeches.
In conversation with Dr. Ranney, we discussed his experience as a medical officer at NASA and the Royal Air Force, his immense love for fitness and well-being, his interactions with Sadhguru and his take on spirituality, and yes, how he won the Guinness Book of World Record for backwards running.
Let's listen in.
For Homo sapiens has rewritten the rules of the game. This single ape species has managed within 70,000 years to change the global ecosystem in radical and unprecedented ways. Our impact is already on par with that of the ice ages and tectonic movements. Within a century, our impact may surpass that of the asteroid that killed off the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. That asteroid changed the trajectory of terrestrial evolution, but not its fundamental rules, which have remained fixed since the appearance of the first organisms 4 billion years ago. During all of those eons, whether you were a virus or a dinosaur, you evolved according to the unchanging principle of natural selection. In addition, no matter what strange and bizarre shapes life adopted, it remained confined to the organic realm. Whether a cactus or a whale, you were made of organic compounds. Now, humankind is poised to replace natural selection with intellectual design and to extend life from the organic realm into the inorganic.
Thank you, Dr. Ranney. That was an excerpt from the book Homo Deus by Yuval Noah Harari. Welcome to Paperback by the Open Library Project. I am your co-host Satyajit, otherwise known as Onion Knight in most food circles. I am hosting this podcast with my co-founder at the Open Library Project, Racheta Sharma.
Hi guys, I'm Racheta and I'm an ex-banker who gave up my banking profession to follow my passion and run libraries across the world. The Open Library Project is a non-fiction book library service offered to businesses on a subscription basis. We're trying to move away from the run-of-the-mill library concept and setting up rotational and locational curated libraries at co-working spaces, corporates and business incubators. The idea here is to create value, build a knowledge community and encourage a growth mindset amongst our members.
Today we have with us on the show Dr. Marcus Ranney of Thrive Global. Dr. Marcus Ranney completed his Bachelor of Science and Medical degrees from University College Medical School in London. His passion for extreme physiology have led him to climbing the sides of Everest, skiing in the Arctic and the European Alps, and serving as a medical officer in the Royal Air Force at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. After practicing medicine in London, Marcus moved to Mumbai in 2010, where he has worked in a number of roles within the healthcare industry and is currently General Manager of Thrive Global in India, a US-based behavior change technology and media company. A champion of well-being, Marcus is a big believer that sustainably improving the lives of billions of people the world over can only be brought about by enhancing the positive aspects of health rather than focusing solely on the pathogenesis and disease. He's a keen athlete and a long-distance runner. He holds a Guinness World Record for backwards running and thoroughly enjoys being a father to his 2 young children. Welcome to the show, Dr. Ranney.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me, both of you.
Thank you for coming. So, wow, you said you've climbed the sides of the Everest and served as a medical officer to the Royal Air Force and NASA. So, could you tell us about your journey?
Yeah, it's been an interesting one for sure. It's been one of zigzags, as a real dear friend of mine used the phrase recently. I tend to maybe subconsciously become bored or claustrophobic after a while, and so I've always tried to rediscover myself and reinvent ways of learning and pushing myself through this journey. At the heart of everything that I've done through my career, it's been this fundamental passion with the sciences beyond the biological biological sciences, the physical sciences, the natural sciences as well, and understanding how that impacts our life and the interaction that our life then has with the planet and the environment around us. So it's been a fortunate journey. Yeah.
And could you tell us more about what Thrive Global does and, the role that you have at Thrive Global in India?
So Thrive Global is the world's largest behavior change well-being company. It was founded by Arianna Huffington, the founder and CEO of the Huffington Post previously, in 2016. And our mission in life is to help address the global epidemic around stress and burnout and helping people become the best versions of themselves. So we produce corporate programs as part of our enterprise solution where we go in and work with companies to create entire paradigm shifts around what their thoughts of well-being are, whether it be conducting workshops and seminars, and then helping people sustainably create behavior change through our digital layer, which comes in a mobile app and podcasts and web series, etc. And in addition to the enterprise solution, we also have a media company. Of course, having Arianna involved, it's using her pedigree, it would have been silly not to have that component. And so we're the world's largest well-being media channel now. We have, in fact, in the US alone, we have close to 30 million monthly viewers. In India, we've been live now for just over 8 weeks, and we've already crossed that number.
Wow.
So it's been a fantastic journey. What we do is we bring, similar to what you guys do on your platform, is we bring voices from the outside world, whether it's from the business community or the sporting community or the spiritual leadership, etc., and have them tell their stories on our platform, either through articles or videos or podcasts, etc. And that storytelling paradigm is what we then use to keep people inspired and motivated to make change in their own life and then plug into our digital solution. Yeah.
Wow,
and burnout must be so common, right? In like the pressure that Indian companies put upon themselves. I think there would be number of cases of burnout.
Absolutely. I'm sure in your banking career you would have seen something like that, right? It's, for me, having spent the early part of my career on the clinical side of medicine and really focused on pathogenesis and disease, the self-irony that I found a few years ago was that as healthcare experts, in inverted commas, there's really little health in our care. We're so focused on the disease side that it actually allowed me to take a step back and think about how do you prevent these things from coming. And a lot of the data and science which is now coming out of the corporate world is indicating the implication that stress as a fundamental lever is having, not just on our day-to-day sense of well-being, but on the long-term implications of developing chronic diseases, whether it's on the mental health side or even on the physical health side as well. So,
I mean, I don't know about burnouts, but I've heard of a lot of people with posture problems in the banking industry because it's just you're sitting all the time.
It's called text neck and all kinds of stuff. Yeah, we've seen a 200-fold rise in technology, mobile phone usage alone amongst the millennials in the last 3 years in India. And on the burnout side, the numbers are really scary. 80% of all corporate employees in India currently complain of stress at their workplace. 60% of whom want to leave their jobs directly because of that. So it's
directly because of the stress their job is causing them.
Yeah.
That's a huge percentage of.
So it's moved. The conversation has moved from being something which is a nice to have to having direct business consequences because there's a tangible ROI. If you can take away that stressful component, you have more productive, higher performing human capital assets, as people see them, and naturally the business as well because you're more innovative, you're more creative, you tend to communicate better, and then you just enjoy your sense of work as well.
In fact, at the library we have a one day a month you get to take a mental health day just to realign yourself with
because
we just feel that life is stressful anyway and work is stressful, so let's recognize that, let's try and make some adjustments to try and inculcate a better work-life balance or a lesser stress work-life.
Well, I'm glad you're starting with 1 day a month, but I hope that that increases from there. I mean, it starts with sleeping, right? If you get 8 hours of sleep every day, that's the first step on this journey.
Yeah, so we'll probably learn a few tips from you through this podcast on how we could better the work-life balance, I guess. And you're also, like Satyajit said, a champion of well-being. So, since you had such a vast experience, in the medical industry, would you possibly recommend a few, healthcare books that would be useful to our listeners?
Healthcare books.
Yeah, do you think any of them are of any use?
No, look, they're all a lot of them. I won't say they all. Exactly. I really enjoyed reading Ariana's book called The Sleep Revolution recently.
Okay.
She internationally has been known to be the sleep lady. She started her TED Talk a few years ago by saying, I'm the woman who slept my way to the top. Not because of why we think that's so, because she sleeps 7 to 9 hours a day. So that's a fantastic book because there's a lot of data, there's a lot of science in there, and anecdotes as well on that front. Because sleep is a fundamental pillar for our own well-being, and actually it's become a badge of honor. People think that, I can survive on only 4 hours of sleep. Exactly, right? But it's so counterintuitive to actually...
How will you function at 100% if you're depriving yourself of one of the most...
It's like if you're using your machinery 100% of of the time
and not servicing it.
It's going to run out someday, burn out.
Absolutely. So machines were built with downtime as an adverse feature, but the human operating system is not built that way. Right? We have to
require that minimal amount of sleep every day. I think. So great. I think the first book we are getting into is Homo Deus by Yuval Noah Harari. So Marcus, tell us what stood out about this book for you.
It's been a real fascination, actually. I started by reading his first book, Homo Sapiens, a few years ago, and I was attracted to that book because it was almost like a compendium of human existence. Right from the beginning of time, he takes the reader through this chronological process to where we are at today, and his insight which he has on the world, right from the historical perspective, anthropology, biological sciences, history, politics, etc., is really quite fascinating. So that was a great kind of reflection of where humanity is and where we've come from. And then of course Deus came in. The timing of it was interesting because I myself was beginning to look at future studies. Started writing a book myself about the future of health, the future of well-being. And so started to think about, there are all of these technologies which we have in our lives, right, from the mobile phone as the basic unit of that all the way upwards. But what is the implication that that's going to have on our sense of well-being and the way healthcare is being distributed and serviced for, humanity? And of course this book came in and it was like a projection looking forward to the next 100 years.
What may happen.
Absolutely. So I naturally picked it up. I find his writing style amazing. I know he was in Bombay a few weeks ago. I missed him, unfortunately, but it's.
In fact, we had a chance to
happened to go for the media event.
Amazing.
Yes, and
we had a chance.
We got to not only get his book recommendations, which we will be discussing in a podcast in the future.
Fantastic.
But also we've got the opportunity to sort of understand what the books were really about. So. Reading the book and actually, conversing with him was a whole different experience because you realize that he has so much knowledge in that, particular sector and that it's just insane how he has understood the evolution. So, like he says that humans are the smartest species only because we can work together and we can cooperate on a massive scale, which no other species can do. And that is why we are the most intelligent.
That's why we are humans and we are not chimpanzees because we can interact as large groups together and work for the greater good of the society. Whereas any other animal is not capable of. That's why humans have dominated the planet for so long. And in fact, in that conversation itself, someone asked him about the implications of data security, and that led to a whole conversation about Homo Deus, where he said it's now up to us to sort of make a choice in the future whether so I think Homo Deus talks about two different futures in ways. The one is dataism and one is transhumanism. I think it's called so
I think it's techno-humanism.
So he said that the choice is up to us. Do we choose to be super intelligent, non-empathetic, do we choose that as a species for us, or is empathy going to play a big part in our future? So that is one of the conversations that really stood out for me from not just the conversation we had, but from the book, because it's such a amazing perspective to look at things.
That's the only thing that sort of is going to keep us in,
relevant.
Relevant, like keep you above a machine, because we have empathy and they don't.
Yeah.
So
I think as a young father, I've got two young kids. My son Aiden is 2.5, and we just had a daughter 3 months ago, under 3 months ago.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And as any young parent will tell you, there's this moment of existential crisis which happens, that you suddenly come to the realization life is beyond me, the I, and we, husband and wife, and all of a sudden you have this sense of purpose and something which grows beyond you. And particularly in this world that we live in, where there's so much competition around education and am I doing the best for my child, something which parents inevitably get into the conversation into is which school and what type of curriculum is good. And then if you really extrapolate that out, you're really wondering, what do you do to prepare your child for his or her future when they turn 18, 21 and they enter the workforce. And so for me it was also trying to future-proof, maybe this was subconscious, but trying to future-proof my own children's welfare in understanding what are the skills that are really required for the next generation to remain relevant. And the author in this book does touch upon that, where he starts to look at issues around the augmentation or the substitution elements of artificial intelligence. Whether you're an optimist or pessimist, you can choose whichever direction. But he mentions the things that you mentioned around creativity and empathy, and those being the critical skills which hopefully the computers will not be able to necessarily make an immediate replacement for, and therefore creating some sense of requirement for the human race in the world.
That would be aptly put.
That was about Homo Deus by Yuval Noah Harari. We had the opportunity to meet him, and it was enlightening for both Rachita and me. We found ourselves contemplating a lot of thoughts that we thought we had thought about, and reconsidering them in the light of the conversation that we had.
Asking the right questions. Like he says.
Yeah. So we'll be back after these short messages.
Hello, everybody. It's been another awesome week on the IVM Podcast Network. Please follow us on social media if you aren't. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. On Cyrus Says, Cyrus talks to comedian Neville Shah about going to the same school as Freddie Mercury and how difficulties in life make for great comedic material. On Paisa Vaisa, Anupam is joined by the very first guest he had on his podcast. Mahavir Chopra is the Director of Health, Life and Strategic Initiatives at CoverFox. They talk about new online ULIPs and why they're worth your investment. On How to Citizen, Meghnad and Shreya speak to comedian Abbas Momin, that's our very own Abbas, about understanding laws. They try to understand our free speech laws and what exactly is dissent. On the Filter Coffee podcast, animal activist Anand Siva joins Karthik Nagarajan to talk about animal cruelty and environmental conservation. On Geek Fruit, Tejas and Dinkar are joined by producer Janam to discuss the mind-effing films of Christopher Nolan. They talk about his beginnings, his first films, and the moment where he became the modern-day god of cinema. We have a Valentine's Day special on Advertising is Dead. Varun's guest is none other than his wife Pooja Johri, who is also CEO at The Glitch. They talk about how they balance their personal and professional lives, how she's made creative people work under a structure, and a lot more. On Golgappa, Rajshri Deshpande of Sacred Games fame talks to Tripti Kamkar about taking up challenging roles as an actor and her social work initiatives. And with that, let's get you on with your show.
Welcome back, guys. We still have with us Dr. Marcus Ranney of Thrive Global. The next book we are discussing is A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking. So, Marcus, tell us, what stood out about this book for you?
My love affair with this book started, this sounds really geeky, and my wife will cringe again when she hears this story. But it's that I think I must have been about 10 or 11. I had just seen the film Jules Verne's Time Machine movie, the first version that was made in color. And immediately I went down to the library because I just thought, I'm going to build a time machine.
Yeah.
And I had that.
We've all had that thought, I think,
exactly,
at some point in time.
Good. My wife, if you're hearing this, I'm not just the weirdo, right? There are more like me out there.
Definitely.
And so, that's where the sort of love affair with this storyline about time travel and physics came about. And of course, as I aged and started to study mathematics and mechanics and advanced mechanics and then physics, etc. at school, it was kind of reinforced. But like so many people, when I look up at the night sky, it just amazes me, and I was therefore just naturally drawn to this idea of what is out there.
Yeah.
And Professor Hawkins, the late Professor Hawkins, just had an amazing ability to distill some of the most complex conversations that humanity faces and communicate that in a style which anyone can pick it up and try and contemplate for himself or herself.
This book is such a quick read, right? It's not even a big book in terms of the pages that it has.
Well, my 12-year-old self might disagree with you there.
But while reading the book, I also found myself re-interested in physics, and same way you thought about time travel, I went up and looked up a couple of things that I had read in the book. So definitely a very simple. It's put in a very simple language, so everyone can understand. And I think that's what really stood out about the book for me when I read it. That even though I'm not as qualified or a scientist or anything, I could easily grasp the basics of the concepts, and it really got me reinterested in science.
Yeah.
So that's the thing with books, right? And even like if you're a teacher, it's more about how people understand you rather than what you're trying to put out there. So you can be very knowledgeable, but if people are not able to understand what you're saying, then the purpose is lost. So I think that being an easy read makes it a lot easier and a lot more interesting because you can understand what he's talking about.
Yeah.
And did that inspire you to work with the NASA?
With NASA,
yeah, maybe it did. I actually fell into the space travel component because of my love affair with human physiology, which we'll touch upon slightly later on in this podcast series. But it's sort of if one connects the dots, it all comes together. I was just going to add that the interesting thing about Stephen Hawking's work is that if one looks beyond the layer of physics, he actually asks more fundamental, spiritual / I don't want to use the religion, but questions about God and the and the purpose of us and nature and the universe itself. And I think that interplay is really interesting. Particularly for I think young minds as they question the physical world around themselves. It's useful for them to also go beyond that and see how do all these dots come together.
Right.
And I think if more people can introspect and question some of the fundamental tenets we have in our world, then hopefully we'll have more harmony and peace around the place.
It's very interesting you said that because even physics at some level starts to deal with the spiritual questions of, right, we have the God particle and things like that, where even the physicists are now saying that there may be more dimensions that we cannot access, and it's still in a gray area because we probably don't have the knowledge as a human society yet, or the ability to comprehend that sort of knowledge, right? So spirituality and physics, I think, have always been there has been some connection.
At higher school I studied 5 subjects. I did chemistry, biology, physics, maths, and then philosophy. And one of the things which I realized was that actually biology is essentially chemistry at its heart. Chemistry is essentially physics. Physics is essentially math, and math is essentially philosophy. And then when you get into philosophy, then you get into all those other realms of spirituality and ethic, etc. And there was this beautiful kind of thread which then came through that, which kind of just reinforces what you were saying about the hand and glove of spirituality.
Yeah. It's amazing. You can't, in hindsight, you see a lot of things, but when you're going forward in time, I think it's a little more difficult
Yeah. I think that's what's common in both the books that we've discussed until now is like theories. There are theories which cannot be proven though, and you can also falsify those theories with sort of finding facts which would go against it, like how the evolution of the aircraft and all of that took place. Like earlier we were like, no, humans can't fly, and then that theory is proven wrong. So it exists till it's proven wrong, I guess.
So I think we gain more knowledge and then we apply it, and we don't know what's possible in the future, right? Especially now while we're seeing such dramatic change over the next couple of decades. I think everything will change because technology is accelerating so quickly. So I don't think any of us we can actually predict it, right?
I think it was the famous physicist Bohr who said the only certainty in life is the uncertainty of the future. Right?
Wow. So from that book, we are moving on to inner engineering. What is this book about, Marcus?
This is fascinating. This is something which is, from
this brings out the spirituality.
Exactly. And for me personally, it's something which, I've only really come to the appreciation over the last, couple of years. Looking beyond the traditional mindset of, Western modern medicine lens of life, having been brought up in a very Christian household with a set of dogma and values around that, moving to India, being exposed to ideas beyond the traditional, Western mindset that I was mentioning, has been this sort of interesting journey around this. Sadhguru is a fascinating individual. I've had the opportunity to meet him, in fact, most recently, just a few weeks ago, because he has very graciously come on board and become the guest editor for Thrive Global for this month, for January.
Oh, wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah. And thank you. And so, we're doing all this great work with him in his office, and his team gave me a copy of this book. And what I find fascinating about his work is that it's obviously looking at very deep yogic principles, but he translates that in a way which has an application to the corporate employee and individual, and particularly is his use of the vehicle of humor in bringing quite not just complicated but sometimes difficult to consume ideas, and then breaking that tension by using humor as a vehicle for that. And inner engineering is of course, I think, one of his paramount pieces, because he has an entire workshop series around that, an offline environment where corporate leaders can go and learn from it. And the nice thing about the book is, in addition to the theory, which he walks you through, he has these it's sort of intercept with sadhanas. So practical tips, which are not just yoga poses, but they're actually things like, dietary, nutritional advice, or how to be more mindful in your workplace or at home. So it's a really useful read that way. And, even, non-secular, non-religious, non-spiritual, whatever, it's just a way of life.
And it's like being healthy 360 degrees.
Yeah, it's well-being. And, again, for me, it's that journey of well-being and understanding where does this fit into that overall paradigm, the connection, the purpose, all of those things. So it's been quite a really fascinating book. Yeah.
Sounds like a fascinating read.
Yeah.
The next book we're discussing is Famous People's Famous Speeches. So what about this book stood out for you? Is this a collection of speeches?
Yeah. Maybe 3 famous people's speeches that really...
Yeah, this is an anthology of speeches by famous politicians, historians, leaders from around the world through time. I was drawn to the idea of this book because I've always been fascinated by this concept of the narrative. People take for granted sometimes that large ideas that change humanity, society, essentially distill down to a single concept and single, almost a word. And when that word is then extrapolated out, it can be then made into a mission. A mission is then made into a whole movement, and that movement can then change society. I think Barack Obama is the most famous, I think, recent example of the word hope. Right. So it was in that lens that I wanted to pick up this book and see this series of speeches that that people have given through time, whether it was Mandela's famous speech after he came out of Robben Island and became the inaugural black president of South Africa, whether it was Winston Churchill's speech about the Battle of Britain, and of course the movie Dunkirk has romanticized and brought that into the fray for so many, or whether it was Nehru's speech on independence and that beautiful word that he used about tryst with destiny and the world sleeping but India awakening again. So it's really fascinating how, if you just read through these sometimes rather long collection of words, you're actually able to pick out these 2 or 3 core concepts which the orator then uses time and time again to reinforce that message. And now looking back on history, you can actually see how it fit into their overall mission. And some of them are not all necessarily good. The book also has speeches by Hitler. And for all the terror and evil that he created in the world, he still had a very successful movement in being able to inspire a generation, not just of his own population, but beyond that.
I think it comes with a lot of conviction in the person, like whatever the end goal would be, whether it's for Hitler or whether, good or bad. It's basically the conviction with which they put themselves or their thought out there.
It's like when we were when we met Yuval Noah Harari. He said that we need a unifying belief. Yeah. The belief doesn't have to be a true belief also. As long as people agree to it, a large quantum of people. He gave the example of football, saying that people agree to the rules of football, right? So everyone plays the same game
whether
around the world.
Whether you get along with the country or not, you're following the same
football,
rules for the game.
So, great. Can you mention a couple of speeches that stood out for you personally?
Well, the 3 that I mentioned.
Why did it resonate with you?
Well, Winston Churchill, just because I've always had a fascination with that gentleman. Having served in the military, grown up in the UK, been in the Air Force for a few years. My grandfather was actually an Air Force pilot in the Second World War. My father was in the Indian Navy. He served on the Vikrant, so we've had that lineage, so Churchill has been one of those interesting characters in history, because to the West, particularly in Great Britain, he's seen as this amazing hero, wartime hero, and he did sort of save the world from fascism and Nazism. But in India, he has a slightly more colourful personality, and of course famously spoke about Mahatma Gandhi and the man in the loincloth and losing India, etc. So Churchill's speech was definitely something which, and his speeches rather, was definitely something which I found most interesting. Nehru's I mentioned just because of the way he used those words around tryst with destiny and India sort of reawakening. We look around and we still see a reawakening of India. Depending on which side of the political spectrum you are, one hopes or doesn't hope that one wakes up from what's happening around. So it's those words were really, really interesting. And then of course, cliche or not, was Nelson Mandela, and just the ability for a human being to go through so much pain and suffering but still not hold people in contempt, and just be so gracious and kind-hearted beyond that.
Awesome. The last book we are going to be discussing is Extremes. So what about this book stood out for you, Marcus?
Well, look, Dr. Kevin Fong is someone who I hold in great regard. He was the inspiration for me on so many levels. When I did my Bachelor's of Science degree at University College London, he was the professor. Well, he's professor now, but not professor at that time. But he was the senior lecturer who ran the course, and he actually came from an astrophysics background at UCL, and then went on to study medicine, become intensive care consultant, and it was his sort of love affair between physics and biology which led to him working at NASA and doing so much great work on the space medicine front. So there was that personal connect. This book has been written by him. It's sort of a compendium of looking at human beings at different extreme conditions. And particularly the historic development of those sciences, whether it was surgery or burn and trauma medicine, etc., etc. So that area of science is my particular favorite. I'm a physiology geek, #physiology geek at heart. It's something that I've been working on. In fact, I have a book coming out next year which looks at this space itself, life at the extremes. So how one pushes the body, whether it's marathon running or climbing Mount Everest or going to Mars or running backwards.
How did that come about?
We should definitely take a minute to discuss that.
Yeah. Running backwards, that...
So for our listeners, Marcus has
a world record.
Yeah, a world record in backwards running. So
this is a Guinness record that was organized in Bombay. I remember seeing something on Facebook about there being this huge group of people that were deciding to run backwards and therefore apply for a Guinness record around this. So I was most fascinated by it. I love these quirkiness in life. I remember we woke up really early. It was being held in Powai. I dragged my wife. My wife said, "I'm not coming for this rubbish." She said, "No, you got to come. You can get a Guinness record at the end of it." So we left in the early morning. We took my son, Aiden. Officially has one too. And he participated in the race in his pram, so I ran backwards pushing him.
Oh wow.
Yeah. And so it was basically the largest collection of people to race each other backwards over a set distance that the Guinness folks deemed to be of value. Record worthy. And I believe it was we displaced Germany. I think there was a record in Germany which was the one that was replaced. So that's just one of those random things in life which happens.
Yeah, but I think so coming back to the book, it also is very similar to what you said, right? That what you're going to be talking about in your book.
Yeah.
Talking about well-being and diseases and extreme conditions in which and how the body reacts to them. So,
yeah. Well, actually, the book that I mentioned is purely focused on physiology.
Okay.
This project for me started 6 years ago. I was having a conversation with Raina, my wife, and she said, well, why don't you document some of the stories of your own experiences before, you're one day too senile and people don't believe you or your kids think that it's too boring. And I thought, hey, that's interesting. And then, so I started jotting stuff down. And then when we got pregnant the first time, I thought, how wonderful would it be for my own children to learn about science from the words of their own father? So the book is actually the physics of physiology. It's hardcore science. It looks at, blood vessels and nerve fibers and the functionings of the inner kidney and, respiratory alveoli, surface tensions and all of those things. So there's not so much of well-being in there as there is about, trying to pick up a physiology textbook. Yeah. But it's been a great journey.
It's physiology made easy.
Physiology made easy. That's good. I might use that.
Yeah.
Hashtag.
Yeah.
Thank you for being with us, Dr. Marcus Ranney, today and sharing your insights on these books. We look forward to having you on our show again. You can follow Thrive Global at thriveglobal.in and on Facebook and Instagram at ThriveIN. And a big thank you to all our listeners. You can follow the Open Library Project on LinkedIn, Instagram and Facebook for latest updates on our events, and stay tuned for the next Paperback podcast on IVM Podcasts. Happy reading. You can follow IVM Podcasts on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter at IVM Podcasts.
Advertising is dead. Yep, you heard me right. Advertising is dead. We're all in the content business now. Let's not call it news, TV, radio, etc., etc. It's all content, and we're in the middle of this weirdly exciting phase where all the borders and lines that have been drawn over decades has been swept away by this lovely thing called the internet. We're a show where we don't dwell on just the stuff that is now, but rather the wider stuff about advertising, media, content, and the whole goddamn circus surrounding it. Tune in every Tuesday for our weekly unboxing of the mystery box we used to call advertising. I'm Varun Dugirala, co-founder and content chief at The Glitch, and this is my new podcast, Advertising is Dead.
Hey Meghnad, do you know how to citizen?
Hey Shreyas, do you know how to citizen?
Hey Meghnad, do you know how to citizen?
Hey Shreyas, let's just do a podcast about it.
Let's do a podcast about it. A podcast is called How to Citizen. In every episode, we get a new guest and discuss one chapter from the 8th grade civics textbook. Think about it as 3 friends revising before a test. and we go back to school. There's nostalgia, there's trauma, there are lunch breaks, there are favorite teachers, there are horrible teachers, there's everything.
So every Tuesday we bring in a guest on the podcast and we ask them a very simple question. Do you know how to citizen?
Meghnath, I think the question is, do you know how to citizen?
But Shreyas, I'm asking you this question. Do you